KMG show for Thursday, July the 14th, 2022. You know, there's an old joke, very old joke, going back to vaudeville about two bald men fighting over a comb. Whenever I read about wither conservatism, that's what comes to mind. Conservatism, I think, the conservative movement, to be more precise, can be understood only in an American sense, and I think only in a post-World War II American sense. Essentially, it was a coalition of left and right in America to fight the Cold War. The left agreed to be on board with containment, and the right agreed to, well, surrender on everything else. And I suppose it worked because the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. But when that happened, there was no longer any reason for a conservative movement. The America of 1991 was very different indeed from the America of 1946. But the conservatives never really seemed to acknowledge that. They have a problem with time and change. All these people carrying on about Ronald Reagan to this day. Ronald Reagan last ran for public office in 1984, which was 38 years ago, which means that the youngest person in the United States who ever voted for Ronald Reagan would be 56 years old now. The communists had been vanquished, at least in, well, most places of the world, and socialism was finished. And so war dividend, peace dividend, perhaps? No. Search for a new enemy. And that search, first we had China, then we had Islam. No, not Islam. Because that would be Islamophobic, and conservatives are nothing if not in favor of diversity and multiculturalism. So I guess we have Putin now. And, let's pretend that Russia is the same as the USSR. And we have the enemies of democracy and those evil forces peddling misinformation and even worse, disinformation. So it seems to me that histories of the conservative movement are really, it's like arguing over ownership of a rotting corpse, but here we go. This is from Steve Saylor's column at Tacky's magazine called The Right Read. Oh, I'm so tired of that cliche. So tired. I know Pat Buchanan has been guilty of it, as have many others. He reviews a book by Matthew Continetti called The Right, The 100-Year War for American Conservatism. And he relates, in Continetti's telling, the good guys are, unsurprisingly, the elitists, such as his in-laws, the Crystals and Himmelfarbs. The bad guys are the populists. But he admits the latter has an annoying habit of often turning out to be more empirically right about the issues than their betters. For example, Continetti writes, quote, "The GOP autopsy released in the spring of 2013 counseled Republicans to support the legalization of illegal immigration. Steve Saylor, a contributor to paleo-conservative journals, put forward an alternative to the Jeb Bush RNC autopsy strategy of outreach to minority groups and young people. Saylor called his approach in reach. Because Republicans drew primarily from white voters, especially married white voters with families, Saylor reasoned that the party should seek to boost turnout among its core constituency rather than fritter away political capital on minority groups whose objections to the GOP were in all likelihood insurmountable. Saylor's thesis found empirical support when election analyst Sean Trend examined the missing white voters in the 2012 election." Unquote. Well, why were there missing white voters? I first asked myself this question in 2004. Imagine that you are white working class. And your options for president are George W. Bush or John Kerry. Why would anyone in the white working class want to vote for either of these men? Both men despise the white working class, despise people who were essentially not like them, not very much like them indeed. But back to Saylor's review. The book is capacious, exhaustive, and far more objective than could reasonably be expected from a hereditary combatant in a field, conservative opinion journalism politics, that is so bitter because the stakes are so high, or perhaps this because the stakes are so low, as the joke goes. Continetti is the son-in-law of William Crystal, co-founder of the Weekly Standard, and grandson-in-law of Irving Crystal, co-founder of the Public Interest, both now defunct, but in their day, influential neoconservative journals. If you're wondering who is included in the right, I can quantitatively summarize Continetti's book by listing the pundits who appear on the most pages. William F. Buckley, founder of National Review, is the central figure in the right, showing up on 107 pages according to the index. I didn't see too much in the book that's new about that legendary personality. So here's a story about WFB that I heard only recently and only from one source, but a reasonably reliable one. WFB, who had won 13% of the vote in an entertaining Conservative Party run for mayor in New York City in 1965, intensely wanted to run for president in 1968. If Jack Kennedy could be president at age 43, why not him? He was surprised and frustrated to find that his own inner circle didn't take him seriously as presidential timber. I am one of the generation who grew up reading Bill Buckley. I was introduced to the conservative movement by him. First saw him on TV, then started reading his books and subscribed to National Review. This was when I was, 13 years old. Funny thing about Bill Buckley, nobody reads him anymore, and he is not an influence on anyone. It's as if he has vanished. Whereas people that Buckley expelled from the movement, such as Sam Francis, to give one example, or Pat Buchanan, are still read, are still studied, are still influential. Back to Saylor. But WFB, despite his high opinion of himself, inherited wealth, cultured tastes, and snobbery, doesn't particularly fit Continetti's organizing dichotomy of elitism versus populism. For instance, when running for mayor, Buckley had done best among outer borough Archie bunkers. Continetti notes, quote, Buckley had uncovered quite by accident the future electoral base of the Republican Party, white voters without college degrees. This discovery put Buckley in an odd position. He was an ambivalent populist. In fact, he rejected the label, but he could not deny that the establishment that National Review poked, prodded, and lampooned was liberal in outlook. He wrote that he would sooner live in a society governed by the first 2,000 names in the Boston Telephone Directory than in a society governed by the 2,000 faculty members of Harvard University. Had he really meant it? Or was Buckley's anti-elitism really just as anti-liberalism in democratic guise? It was a question he never really answered. I suppose you could regard Bill Buckley as one of those patricians, although he wasn't a patrician. He was Irish origin to begin with, and his father was nouveau riche, who made his money as an oil man. That's not what Americans would consider patrician. Here's a funny story about Bill Buckley. His brother-in-law, Brent Bozell, was from Oklahoma, and Buckley made a visit as a young man to Oklahoma with Bozell, and they went into some store, and Buckley angered the shopkeeper, who said to him something like, "Get out of here with your phony English accent." Saylor writes, the main weakness of the right is that Continetti's history of conservative opinion journalism is a little too impartial. The second most cited journalist in the right is Pat Buchanan, who shows up on 42 pages. Buchanan is the designated populist bad guy of the second half of the book, following Joe McCarthy in the first half. But unlike McCarthy, who self-destructed in a big gay conservative fiasco, when his chief of staff, Roy Cohn, got mad at the U.S. Army for drafting his dear friend David Schein, Pat doesn't go away. It's almost as if he was onto something when, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, he began suggesting new policies for a post-Cold War world, rather than the U.S. just keep on keeping on by expanding NATO like respectable conservatives demanded. This big gay conservative fiasco, that's a reference to Roy Cohn. I've read a lot about Roy Cohn and that circle, and David Schein, who he seemed to be quite enamored with, was not homosexual. In fact, David Schein married Miss Universe of 1955, a Swedish woman named Hillevi Rambin, and they had 6 children together. So no flies on David Schein. But back to Steve Saylor. One reason Buchanan's career has lasted so long despite neocon hatred is that he's a terrific guy. Lots of mainstream liberal journalists are ideologically closer to the neocons than they are to Pat, but who do you think they would rather have a drink with? One of the last memories of my father from before his debilitating stroke at age 94 was him reading the copy of Buchanan's Suicide of a Superpower that Pat sent me, complete with his helpful post-it notes and handwritten comments on the pages where he quoted me. My father was impressed. Thanks, Pat. Third, with 41 mentions, is Russell Kirk, author of The Conservative Mind. It's hard to be mad at the lovable Kirk, who was a sort of nice northern Ignatius J. Riley. But Continetti can't overlook the slanderous charge of dual loyalty that Kirk made in 1988 when he joked, quote, "And not seldom has it seemed as if some eminent neoconservatives mistook Tel Aviv for the capital of the United States," unquote. The context here is that what Russell Kirk said was a dig at Norman Podhoritz's wife, Midge Decter. And Midge Decter was a very powerful person within right-wing or conservative circles, such that Russell Kirk, who can be argued to be the founder of the conservative movement, was expelled because Midge Decter was furious. Later, a religious magazine in the United States, founded by a Lutheran Lutheran pastor turned Catholic priest, had a fascinating discussion in the late 1970s that Robert Bork engaged in. Richard John Newhouse was the fellow who started this magazine. How degraded can the United States become? How evil, if you will, can it become before we don't have to be loyal to it? So this went through several rounds in the magazine, and finally, apparently, Midge Decter said enough. And so they stopped, because you didn't want to get on the wrong side of Midge Decter. Saylor continues, of course, these days, after the populist Trump's foreign policy initiatives, everything has changed now, and not seldom, it has seemed as if some eminent neoconservatives mistook Jerusalem for the capital of the United States. Personally, I'm a member of the Larry David School of Social Criticism, who believes that no ethnic group should be off limits for being ribbed about their recurrent tendencies here. In fourth place, at 40 pages, is Continetti's grandfather-in-law, Irving Kristol. He was an entrepreneur of highbrow journalism, founding, with English poet Stephen Spender, the anti-communist leftist magazine Encounter. Leftist? Which the CIA funded to show European intellectuals that you didn't have to be a communist to be smart and classy. Over time, the elder Kristol led an exodus of old Trotskyites to the right, famously quipping that a neoconservative was a liberal who has been mugged by reality. During the 1960s, Kristol worked at Basic Books, where he published Social Scientists, alarmed by how LBJ's Great Society seemed to be having more deleterious effects on the crime and illegitimacy rates than FDR's New Deal ever did. It's worth noting that when neoconservatism was starting out, it tended to be not just obsessed with foreign policy, but also took an intelligent interest in domestic policy. Why are all us liberals suddenly being mugged in Central Park? Actually, Kristol said that despite living for decades overlooking Central Park, he'd never gone for a walk in it. To my mind, according to Saylor, The greatest neoconservative was crime-fighting political scientist James Q. Wilson, but he gets only 3 mentions in the right, which is longer on ideologues than on empiricists. I subscribe to all of the neoconservative magazines right from the very beginning, and I found that they were uniformly intelligent, and they were interested in problems that the politicians didn't seem to be interested in. For instance, why are all our great cities becoming hellholes, and what can we do about it? But then, I guess it would have been in the late 70s, they became obsessed with this idea that the Soviet Union was going to invade Western Europe, launch a first strike against the United States, and, well, pretty much light up a storm about this whole business. And this is when their focus shifted to foreign affairs. And I bought into what they had to say. And later, when I realized I had been gulled, I was quite angry with them. It's been a long time since neoconservatives have had any concern with the way we live now. It's always Israel or the Kurds. Oh, the Kurds have been thrown under the bus to get Turkey to stop its opposition to Baltic and Scandinavian countries joining NATO. Yeah, you're not going to hear anything about our brave Kurdish allies anymore. And now there's our brave Ukrainian allies. Saylor continues, my vague impression is that New York Jewish intellectuals weren't overwhelmingly interested in Israel until its exciting success in the 1967 Six-Day War launched a bandwagon effect among American fans. For instance, commentary editor Norman Podhoritz's second volume of memoirs, Breaking Ranks, which covers the 1960s, doesn't mention Israel until after the 1967 war, after which every up and down experienced by Israel suddenly became a matter of life and death to the elder Podhoritz, rather the way fans of the unstoppable Yankees care more this baseball season than do fans of the trailing Red Sox. Well, I remember the Six-Day War quite well, and I remember how exciting it was. I mean, a whole war in 6 days. It was Novak who wrote a book about this subject, that the interest in the Holocaust absolutely exploded after 1967. It wasn't something that was much talked about in America, even in American academia, but this is a phenomenon that Saylor has noted. The further we get from any historical event, the more importance it assumes, such with the Holocaust. Norman Podhoretz, a very, very clever man. His son, Pod Jr., as they call him, not so clever. Irving Kristol, I would say a very clever man and a wise one. His son, William Kristol, not clever and not wise. I believe this is called regression to the mean. Jacob Heilbrunn, editor of the National Interest, yet another magazine founded by the elder Kristol, argued in his 2008 book, They Knew They Were Right, The Rise of the Neocons, that neoconservatism as a movement was more or less a conspiracy hatched by Daniel Patrick Moynihan and Richard Nixon to lure avid New Israel rooters in New York into supporting America in the Cold War by portraying American strategic strength as crucial as hell. Well, Daniel Patrick Moynihan was another clever man. I remember the unsigned editorial in National Review in 1974 or 75, something like that, addressed to the neocons, and it was called, I believe, Coming in, the Water's Fine. In retrospect, that was a dreadful error because the conservatives, neoconservatives, proceeded to infiltrate the movement, hijack it, and expel anyone who wasn't as bloodthirsty for war as they were. Similarly, when a friend asked press baron Rupert Murdoch why he funded the Weekly Standard, which was edited by Continenti's father-in-law, William Kristol, 15 references in the index, even though Murdoch doesn't seem to care that much about Israel one way or another, the wily Australian magnate replied that when you are a foreigner trying to make it in American media business, you don't need all the Jews in New York on your side, but you do need some of them. Other pundits frequently cited in the right are L. Brent Bozell, Bill Buckley's very Catholic brother-in-law, 31, free market economist Friedrich Hayek, 29, and Milton Friedman, 23, columnist George Will. George Will. 2020, Frank Meyer, National Review's chief theoretician of fusionism, uniting libertarians and traditionalists under the umbrella of anti-communism, 20, and Norman Podhoretz, 19. I'll tell you a story about Norman Podhoretz that a friend of mine who was a journalist was at a party in Manhattan. There was another well-known journalist there. This other well-known journalist wanted to do a poll of the room whether they thought that Pat Buchanan would win the New Hampshire primary. So this would be 1996. And my first friend said to his friend, don't do this. Well, why not? It'll be fun. People are interested. If you do this, Norman and Midge are going to walk out in a huff, and it is going to cause a scandal. That's how afraid people were of this couple. And Saylor concludes an impressively even-handed book. The Right ends with a plea to dump Trump in 2024, along with an admission that conservatism still must incorporate the, quote, policy positions that Donald Trump forced upon the movement, a belief in secure borders and national sovereignty, an emphasis on the condition of working people without college degrees, a tough stance toward China, and a reluctance toward humanitarian interventions abroad, unquote. All very good, but I don't believe them. Not for a second. Neocons are incorrigible liars. You remember the Tea Party movement? Does anyone remember the Tea Party movement? Yeah, we're taking back America. We're going to transform the Republican Party. And so the Republican Party went to the Tea Party and said, we like the way you think. But, you know, we have a lot of experience in politics and mobilization, organization. So perhaps you could benefit by our expertise. Foolishly, the Tea Party said yes, and the movement was completely subsumed by the GOP, by Conservatism, Inc. These people will always, of course, we just love working people without college degrees. Yes, secure borders and national sovereignty and all the rest of it. They don't believe in any of it. What they do believe in, again, it's a mystery. As I've said many times before, it's a mystery religion. Here's an interesting quote in Steve Saylor's blog at uns.com. Someone had asked his son, William, have the elite neocons been right about anything at all? Just visiting. Answers, I knew Bill well in our college days. Even then, he was a fan of Leo Strauss and openly advocated the so-called noble lie as a critical tool of public policy. I would often remind him, Bill, you only need to get caught lying one time and no one will ever trust anything you ever say again. He would just laugh and say, well, then I better not get caught. Welcome to the world of the neocons. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Ann Run, who wishes us a happy Bastille Day. Hello to Dan, Don Willis, Ann Run, Don from Beyond, G's Histal, Emmett Kelly's Earth, and Denny McDougall, Ruslan Akhmatov. Don Willis says, I liked Old Dutch. Well, I liked Old Dutch too. But, you know, there was a fundamental misapprehension about Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, who was a fierce admirer of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And a lot of people who supported Reagan, his most fervent supporters, thought that Ronald Reagan was going to drastically decrease the size of government. Ronald Reagan had no problem with big government. In fact, government exploded in size during the 8 years when he was president. Ruslan Akhmatov says, is it me or is there just nothing all that interesting going on, just rehashing of the SOS? I don't think so. There are many, many, many things, interesting things happening now. Perhaps even, you know, things that are existentially important. And I don't like to use that word. Don from Beyond says, in my current job, I'm scoring biology essays by high schoolers in Massachusetts for state tests. I'm sickened by the students constantly writing how bad carbon dioxide is, like it's a poisonous gas. Don Willis doesn't like Reagan's gun laws. And of course, Ronald Reagan gave America the amnesty. Oh, but, you know, we're just going to make sure that this never happens again. And of course, nothing was done. You have to be, I don't know, that when people on the left or liberals make promises, do you think that they're ever going to keep these promises? Ever? I wrote John McCain, prominent neocon. Build the damn wall, he growled during his last Senate run. And of course, he voted against the wall because they're all liars. And who else do we have? Who else do we have here? I want to know, have you ever seen the rain? CCR, that's from Don Willis. Ruslan Akhmetov says Biden is a hologram of honor. Hello to David the Gnome. Oh, we're talking about Wages of Fear, which is an excellent film. Of course, I also like the remake, Billy Friedkin's Sorcerer, very much as well. The Wages of Fear was a French film. It was not Pontecorvo. No, it wasn't. It was Henri-Georges Clouzot. And I'm just scrolling down here. Don Willis says Patrick J. Buchanan called these issues all the way back then, nailed it. Yes, he did. He pointed out, going back to the 1990s, that big businessmen in America, they no longer have any loyalty to America. They certainly don't have any loyalty to, their communities where their factories are located or the headquarters are loyalty. They say that they have a loyalty to their shareholders. No, they have a loyalty to the board and the management, the people who get stock options, and the people whose wealth increases dramatically when the company buys back their shares. Popcasso 88 points out that Shine executive produced The French Connection. And hello to Oscar Toe. Don Willis says Tel Aviv is a party spot. So I have heard. A lot of people on the right. Do you know just how gay Tel Aviv is? Oh, yeah, okay. And that means that I don't know. This is supposed to make me like Israel more. I don't really understand that argument. These are, these are people who call themselves conservative, but conservatives now believe that male homosexuals somehow managing to procure children from women who've been turned into baby machines, the real Handmaid's Tale, they think that's just swell. Hello to Tarot Destroyer, who says, in general, Dignitas uses the following protocol to assist suicides: an oral dose of an antiemetic drug, followed by a lethal overdose of 15 grams of pentobarbital dissolved in water. Che Blutarsky says, who do you think of first when you hear the description smarmy turd? I'd guess that Bill Kristol would be the most common answer. Buchanan name check Spengler on the McLaughlin group. Pretty cool, says Hauper. And Glenn Beck was actually pretty good when he had a show on CNN. It's funny, then he went way downhill when he left. This was a fellow, it always seemed to me that he was likely to explode. I remember reading that he was complaining. This is decades later, you understand, that as a child, he and the rest of his family went to Birch Bay, Washington, which is quite close to the Canadian border. And he just thought this was not suitable. This was just not a good enough vacation spot. I was taken to Birch Bay once. I can just report one thing about it. It's not a beach in the way that we understand beaches in North America. It's like what they call in England the shingle. So there are all these stones. And so, there's the beach, We take off our shoes, our socks, and run around on the beach and just hopping from rock to rock going, ow, 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 ow. This really hurts. So, but no, what kind of a man is going to bitterly expound at length about a childhood vacation decades earlier? Sorcerer is a horrible title, says Palcasso 88. That is the credited response, that people thought the movie was going to be about dragons or wizards or some such thing. Hello to Tom Anderson. Nice to hear from you again. Hello to John Vance, who points out vaccines every 9 months now. Yeah, I wonder how many takers there are going to be. I don't know if KMG hunts. No, but I did stay in a hotel at Torquay once, says Matt Beck. Victoria Helen Stone, talking about King Curtis. I do not like to talk about King Curtis's death because it is such an outraging and stupid story. He bought a townhouse in Harlem, and there was some junkie shooting up in front of his door, and he remonstrated with the junkie, and he got stabbed to death. Jay Blatarski says David Goldman seems to compare every conflict to the 30 Years' War, but his article today was pretty chilling. The 30 Years' War, that's, before the 20th century, that was like the gold standard for worst war in Europe's history. It also went on for 30 years. No, you do not want to be in a 30 Years' War. Let's talk more about Conservatism, Inc. Kevin Williams, I thought it was, Williamson, had written about an exchange about my friend and former National Review colleague David French. David really brings it out in people for whatever reason. It is a cliche to assert that critics of a man are simply envious of him, but I think that's approximately it in his case. He makes a certain kind of man feel small. Father of natural and adopted children, Ivy League pedigree, Bronze Star, a leader in his community. What community? And what would a leader be? What would that mean? Considerable professional accomplishments. Oh, well, name some. Bronze Star, because he was in JAG in Iraq. And they give these things out like participation medals. Whenever this is mentioned, a bunch of people get angry on Twitter. Bronze Star? Well, there are two kinds of Bronze Stars. There's the Bronze Star, which is a participation medal, and then there's the one with V for Valor. Okay, that means that you fought someone. I think the toughest thing that David French ever went through in the Green Zone in Baghdad, and this is a joke, but it's probably close to the truth, is that the air conditioning went out one day, and it was over 2 hours before they fixed it. Williamson continues, I should write something long about him one of these days. In the meantime, very entertained by the notion that David French, a cum laude graduate of Harvard Law, writes critical columns about evangelical Christians and political conservatives because he thinks that's the best way for him to make money. He's invited now to write for The Atlantic and the New York Times. It seems to be working for him. I don't agree with everything David writes or thinks, but the man deserves better critics. The ones he has are too dumb and too rage-besotted even to hate him adequately. Pedro Gonzalez comments, Kevin Williamson, who got fired from The Atlantic and went crawling back to National Review, said David French's critics are just envious. First of all, the accomplishments that Williams lists, French's defense of Groomer Story Hour at a pivotal moment is what people will remember of him. The man who at a crisis point in this country made the conservative case for National Review in defense of groomers dressing up in drag for children as a blessing of liberty, that eclipses everything else. Indeed it does. And we have a significant article from Revolver.news by Darren Beattie. The hidden agenda behind the New York Times desperate puff piece on Ray Epps. And you could have added, or it's feds all the way down. The New York Times just released a puff piece on Ray Epps that is hugely important. Ray Epps, the only person caught on camera repeatedly directing people into the Capitol, is the only January 6th rioter for whom the New York Times has written a highly sympathetic puff piece. It's just been hell. Life is the victim of a January 6th conspiracy theory. Ray Epps became the unwitting face of an attempt by pro-Trump forces to promote the baseless idea that the FBI was behind the attack on the Capitol. He says, to get acquainted with Epps, watch the following video compilation. And he is directing people to enter the Capitol. Oh, lies, Epps says, lies. All of this has just been hell. Let's skip straight to the buried lead. Here we see a reference to a text message Epps sent to his nephew describing how he orchestrated movements of people to the Capitol after Trump's speech. Mr. Epps also said he regretted sending a text to his nephew well after the violence had erupted, in which he discussed how he helped orchestrate the movements of people who were leaving Trump's speech near the White House by pointing them in the direction of the Capitol, unquote. Will this text message soon become a matter of public record? What exactly is Epps phrasing? Will other Ray Epps communications soon come out that will further clarify the sudden need for aggressive damage control? For clarification, here is a video compilation of Epps orchestrating movements to the Capitol. We wonder how precisely Epps described his decision to do so. Getting back to the Times piece, it's also important to note that the piece contains no explicit denial by Epps of association with military intelligence, DHS, JTTF, or any cutouts or intermediaries. We have reference to so-called lies, and Epps wished that the truth come out, in addition to denial of association with law enforcement. I wonder if the author of the New York Times piece, Alan Foyer, or Fire, don't know how he pronounces it, could clarify for the record. Did he ask Epps if he had any association with any intelligence agencies or cutouts of such agencies? If so, what did he say? If not, why not? I'm going to call him Fire. Fire's NYT piece describes Epps as a Trump supporter. He says Trump traveled to Washington to back Mr. Trump. That should be Epps. And that he took a last-minute trip to Washington for Trump's speech about election fraud. Revolver comments, the only problem is that Ray Epps didn't go to Trump's speech. That's right. This alleged Trump supporter traveled all the way from Arizona to D.C. and didn't even attend Trump's speech. Instead, he spent the evening of January 5th and the morning of the 6th telling people to go to the Capitol. Did Alan Fire, the obscure NYT reporter who penned the puff piece, think to ask Trump supporter Epps why he traveled all the way to D.C. and skipped Trump's speech? For that matter, did Fire ask where Epps got the idea to urge people to go into the Capitol in the first place? Did it occur to Epps out of the blue? Did someone else give Epps the idea? If so, who? The whole purpose of the January 6th committee is to figure out what caused the events of the 6th. Epps was calling for people to go into the Capitol the evening before. Wouldn't it be newsworthy to know where Epps got the idea and why he was so doggedly fixated on that particular mission? The very fact these questions weren't asked indicates that this is one of the sloppiest and most transparent cover-up jobs in New York Times history, a total Fire job. The Times piece attempts to wave off Epps' January 6th participation as negligible, similar to those who committed minor offenses and weren't charged. Yet Epps is the key person caught on video with an advanced plan to go into the Capitol. He's there on the morning of the 6th, directing people to the Capitol, and he's right up at the barricade during the initial breach, after which he rushes into the restricted zone. Note that many others, including Jeremy Brown, Owen Schroyer, Mark Ibrahim, Couy Griffin, have been hit with trespassing charges for this. But Epps isn't open to just a trespassing charge. Not enough has been said about the significance of the following video. Note Epps' message, when we go in, leave this here. Epps says this just minutes before the initial breach of the Capitol grounds. How is this not basis for a conspiracy charge? Well, we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez seemingly confirming that they were invited into the Capitol building, which is interesting to hear from her. This is another piece from Revolver, and there's a tweet by Kim.com. Javelin, NLAW, and AT-4 launchers are for sale by Ukrainian arms dealers. Ukrainian generals and soldiers are underpaid and sell U.S. and U.K. weapons on the black market. Every wannabe terrorist can now destroy civilian aircraft and kill hundreds for just $20,000. I don't think that any lessons were learned from Iraq and Afghanistan. where billions of dollars of not just equipment, but money, pallets of $100 bills just disappeared. Just disappeared. But that's one of the costs of war. You remember the turbine? The three-way fight between Ukraine, Germany, and Canada over a turbine that needed to be repaired. This is from RT.com. The Ukrainian World Congress, a major international diaspora organization, announced Tuesday that it had asked a court to issue an injunction to prevent the Canadian government from returning a German-made gas turbine that Russia says it needs to deliver natural gas to Germany. The group said its effort, together with local allies, to lobby the Canadian government failed to stop Ottawa from reaching a deal with Berlin on the key piece of equipment. As a result, the UWC has asked the Federal Court of Canada to intervene. And what standing does the Ukrainian World Congress have in this? Last time I checked, the government of Canada was sovereign and can do whatever they like with this turbine. The turbine in question was used to pump Russian natural gas to Germany via the Nord Stream undersea pipeline. The Russian gas company Gazprom sent it to the manufacturer Siemens Energy for routine maintenance, which was done at a plant in Montreal. However, anti-Russian sanctions imposed by Canada barred the company from returning it. Last month, Russia said it had no choice but to decrease the flow of gas into Europe via Nord Stream by roughly 60% due to the missing piece of equipment. Germany initially decried the decision as political before later scrambling to negotiate a sanctions waiver from Canada, which the UWC wants the Canadian court to scrap. We cannot supply a terrorist state with the tools it needs to finance the killing of tens of thousands of innocent people, said Paul Grod, the UWC head, apparently referring to the Russian military operation in Ukraine. The organization's leader called Russia's decision to limit the capacity of Nord Stream energy blackmail. So the Russians are evil when they sell gas to Europe, and then they're evil when they cut back on the sale of gas to Europe. And Grod said that there were better ways to resolve Germany's gas supply needs than simply caving in to Moscow. Namely, existing pipelines in Ukraine could serve as a conduit for gas to Germany, calling on Berlin to pressure Moscow into using the Ukrainian transit route. So, Western countries, and led by Ukraine, to Russia, we will destroy you. Half an hour later, hey, Moscow, Mr. Putin, could you do us a favor? Could you route your gas through the Ukraine? Because that would really help us out a lot. Why on earth would they think that Russia is going to do any favors for them or for the Ukraine? This is from the Russians with Attitude Twitter site. Random observation: when there is collateral damage and civilians die due to Russian strikes, the reactions in Russian social media cover the whole range from deep regret to vicious gloating. But when the AFU kills civilians, every Ukrainian channel and their Westoid fans just deny it. Like you have the largest Ukrainian Telegram channels with over 2 million followers flat out claiming that Russia is shelling Donetsk. Useful rule of thumb: whenever the Ukrainians accuse the Russians of something, you can be almost certain that it is the Ukrainians who are doing this. Let's check on antiwar.com. Biden says U.S.-Israeli connection is bone deep. Israel shows air defense system to Biden, including laser iron beam. Ukraine and Russia reach deal on grain exports. EU says Lithuania must allow sanctions goods to Kaliningrad. NATO and EU seeking to track arms sent to Ukraine. Good luck with that. And what are we going to talk about next? Oh, let's go back to Sri Lanka. Oh, by the way, their president, he went to the Maldives. He was going to go to the Gulf. That fell through. Then he went to the Maldives. He got chased out of the Maldives shortly thereafter, and now he is supposedly in Malaysia in an undisclosed location. Beth Whitehead writes in The Federalist, Sri Lanka is what happens when countries fail to realize green policies don't work. You're not going to hear, The Guardian wrote a whole story about this without mentioning Sri Lanka's green revolution. Nitrogen fertilizer is evil, so we're not using it anymore. Oh, we don't have any food anymore, and we don't have any money. This is the plan for the rest of us. It is the plan for the United States, Canada, Britain, und so weiter. Videos of Sri Lankans swimming in their president's pool and tens of thousands swarming his residence went viral over the weekend, but precious little news of the green policies that left the island nation in anarchy made headlines. After months of protest, the Sri Lankan people stormed the presidential suite and burned the prime minister's residence Saturday after both leaders escaped. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa fled to the Maldives, but you know the rest of the story. The fuel has run out in Sri Lanka, with tuk-tuk drivers being forced to wait for days just to fill their 8-liter tanks. Power blackouts are a daily occurrence. The inflation rate in Sri Lanka reached a whopping 54.6% in June, and the growing cost of food, clothing, transportation, and electricity, some of which are 3 times the normal price, has tanked the value of the rupee. Being an island country, catching fresh fish instead of buying food would be a relief, but there's no diesel to go out to sea to fish for them. The crisis in Sri Lanka started in 2019. Run down by years of gross mismanagement over successive governments, Sri Lanka was saddled with mounting debt and inadequate production rates. Rajapaksa succeeded his brother in 2019, and his administration issued deep tax cuts, which only made the situation worse. In 2020, the country was hit by COVID-19, and its debt grew to over 101% of its relation to GDP. The pandemic wiped out much of Sri Lanka's tourism industry, which constituted almost 12% of its GDP. Increasing energy prices in 2022 only further entrenched the nation in an economic crisis, and its national debt for 2022 is estimated to be 109% of GDP. The 2021 inflation surge that has grown into a full economic crisis is in no small part due to climate radicalism. Suckered by European Green Deal propaganda, the Sri Lankan government implemented a ban in April 21 on the main thing propelling its agriculture-based economy, chemical fertilizer. On an island where 15 out of 22 million people rely on farming, over 90% of them had used chemical fertilizer prior to the ban, which went into effect immediately with no time for contingency planning. By the time the government realized its mistake, it was too late. 1/3 of the farmlands lay dormant in 2021, and 85% of farmers faced crop losses. Small farmers bore the brunt of the burden and reported a 50 to 60% decrease in yield. Carrot and tomato prices increased by 5 times. Sri Lanka's rice production fell by 20%, and prices jumped 50% in a span of 6 months. Formerly self-sufficient in rice, shortages forced Sri Lanka to import $450 million worth of the grain. Worse yet, the fertilizer ban hit the tea industry, the second highest export. Sri Lanka exported $1.2 billion worth of tea in 2019. These exports paid for 71% of the country's food imports up until 2021. After the April ban, the tea industry crashed, with production and exports down 18% from November 2021 to February 2022 for a 23-year low. Rajapaksa gave up his goal to become the first nation to fully embrace organic farming and rescinded the ban in November 2021, but the damage was already done. Sri Lanka's stellar ESG score, a United Nations metric of investments made following supposedly better environmental, social, and governance standards, isn't doing its people much good. Even the European Union, which promoted these green policies, is noticing the Green Deal isn't a good one. Earlier this month, after solar and wind-derived energy failed to keep Europe's gas prices down, the EU voted to include some nuclear and natural gas power under the label of green energy. And again, this is an essay by Beth Whitehead at the Federalists. Of course, the big question is, To what extent is this all planned? Hmm? Because, people are a blight on the earth, according to Deep Greens. So we need fewer of them, many fewer of them. And one way to get many fewer people is to starve them to death or freeze them to death. You look at moonofalabama.org. Ukraine sitrep, additional defense lines, a failed counterattack, weapons deliveries. Yes, the front in the east has consolidated. The artillery preparations for the next push had begun immediately after the fall of Lysychansk. The week or two have passed, and the attack on the next defensive line from Seversk to Kurdyumivka has begun. In a week or two, the line, yes, will probably be under Russian control. Bakhmut, which is fortified, may take longer. The Ukrainian army is being, annihilated. I think that's the best way to describe it. It's curious when going to Steve Saylor's site, all of these people, it's just a matter of time until Putin is destroyed and Russia collapses. This is one of those stories like the Corona Doom. Are you keeping up with the news? Is this a religious belief that the Ukraine will prevail? Seems to be solely a religious belief, because it is difficult, but not impossible, to discover what's actually going on in the Ukraine. But these people don't want to. This is from Silvia Amaro at CNBC. Great news. Italian president rejects Mario Draghi resignation as Rome plunges into political crisis. Was this fellow ever voted into anything, this Mario Draghi fellow? Wasn't he appointed? How many of these dominoes are going to fall? We got Sri Lanka. We got Boris Johnson in Britain. Hopefully there will be many, many more. You all know the story of Emmett Till, which happened, just a couple of years ago? No, it happened in 1955. 1955, almost 67 years ago. I'll read from Wiki. Emmett Till was a 14-year-old African-American boy who was abducted, tortured, and lynched in Mississippi in 1955 after being accused of offending a white woman in her family's grocery store. The brutality of his murder and the fact that his killers were acquitted drew attention to the long history of violent persecution of African Americans in the United States. Till posthumously became an icon of the civil rights movement. Till was born and raised in Chicago. During summer vacation in August 1955, he was visiting relatives near Money, Mississippi, in the Mississippi Delta region. He spoke to 21-year-old Carolyn Bryant, the white married proprietor of a small grocery store there. Although what happened at the store is a matter of dispute, Till was accused of flirting with or whistling at Bryant. Well, I followed this story for decades, and Till was accused of doing a lot more than that. This woman, Carolyn Bryant, is now being hounded. I know God knows how old she is, but she needs to be thrown in prison because she made up her story, and she confessed that she made up her story. Well, not so fast. Oh, by the way, Emmett Till's father was a American serviceman during World War II, where he was executed for rape and murder of civilians. This is from Helen Andrews, senior editor at the American Conservative and author of the fine book called Boomers. She tweets, breaking Emmett Till news for real. Carolyn Bryant Donham's memoir, More Than a Wolf Whistle, was supposed to be sealed until her death, but someone leaked it to a reporter, and the full PDF is online. This is her description of the encounter. It sounds like Timothy Tyson was indeed wrong to claim that she had recanted her story. Not yet dark, but not really light either. I noticed a group of young people congregating on the porch. It was not unusual for people to be on the porch, as there were many checker games played by the locals right outside our windows almost daily. It was close to 8 p.m. and dusk was beginning to set in, so I turned the outside lights on. There were 8 to 9 people ranging in age, but mostly young people just staring into the store window. I was neither afraid nor startled. The thought crossed my mind, I wonder what's going on out there. But I didn't think much more about it. The thought left my mind almost as quickly as it entered it. The door opened, and a young black man who appeared to me to be in his late teens or early 20s entered the store. I found out later this young man's name was Emmett Till. I was behind the counter ready to wait on him, and Juanita was in the back room with all 4 boys. The young man went directly to the candy counter. Once there, I asked him if I could help him. He asked me for some candy, gum, or some type of sweets. We had jars of candy and cookies on the top of the counter. I opened the case door to get the items he pointed out, the items he wanted to buy. I mentally totaled the amount he owed. He reached for the small bag of candy from the top of the counter. When I held out my hand for the money, he put no money into my hand, but instead, he caught my hand and told me in a clear voice, "Don't be afraid of me. I've been with white girls before." Whether he stuttered or stammered, I don't recall. I was afraid. His grip was strong as he held my hand from across the counter. Complete astonishment, then fear filled my mind. He asked me, "How about a date, baby?" My mind raced. I feared he was going to molest me or worse. I was afraid for myself and my babies. My babies were in the back room. He then grinned at me as I jerked my hand free from his and dashed toward the main counter to get Roy's pistol. When I reached the open space between the counters, the young man Emmett was there. He had slipped through and caught me with both of his hands on my hip. He was saying to me, "What's the matter, baby? Can't you take it?" I became even more frightened as he was much larger and taller than I. Oh my God, what is going to happen? What is he going to do to me? Were the thoughts that raced through my mind. I continued to struggle to get free from his grasp. As I was struggling, he said, "You needn't be afraid of me. I've effed white women before." And here is another excerpt from her memoir. The older black man that I'd seen earlier in the evening was standing by Juanita's car as I opened the door to retrieve the pistol. I was shaking to the core when I asked him, "Who is that?" He replied, "Mrs. Roy, I don't know. He's from somewhere else. He's not from around here." He told me, "Mrs. Roy, I think you need to go inside and lock the door." I did exactly what he told me to do. I was half scared to death and felt weak with fear. I was certainly going to follow his advice. I went immediately inside and locked the door. As soon as I heard the click of the latch, my knees buckled and I collapsed in a heap on the floor. Juanita came from the back and asked me, "What in the world is wrong with you?" I responded, "Didn't you hear me screaming for you?" She replied, "No, I didn't hear you. What is wrong?" It's no wonder she didn't hear me. The television was on. The kids were playing. She was cooking dinner for our families, and any noises from the front of the store were just drowned out. I told her everything that had happened, stopping often to place my head in my hands and just sob. I was distraught, so it took me a while to calm down. As she tried to console me, she continued to repeat, "Oh my Lord, oh my Lord." I finally began to settle down, and we made a promise to never speak of the incident again. I felt that Roy would never find out, since she and I were the only ones that knew about it. I wasn't about to tell him. I knew if he found out, he'd be mad at me and also want to hurt the young man. We certainly didn't need any trouble. I told her, "Don't you dare tell anyone. Whatever you do, please don't even think about telling your husband." I knew if she told him that he'd tell Roy. Once Roy knew the details, he would be furious. She asked me, "What if he comes back and you are by yourself?" I told her, "I'm never going to be alone in this store again." That statement was only true for a few more days. I would, in fact, be left alone in the store one more time. None of this justifies the torture and murder of Emmett Till, but they always have to paint the lily, don't they? Emmett Till was just a happy-go-lucky 14-year-old, maybe a little mischievous. No, he was far worse than that. And this is what Mrs. Roy, this is what she has said from 1955 onwards. Oh, no, but she admitted it was all a lie. Well, no, actually. And now there's an ongoing attempt to hound this woman to her death. So there's the actual truth about Emmett Till. Let's go to the chat. Didn't you say you were having baggage issues at Heathrow yesterday? Asked Jogokin666. Yes. Palcasso88 says, have to jet. Good night, KMG in chat. Well, thanks for stopping by. The good boy, says Jogokin666. Anrun, Emmett, where are the white women at? Till. Let's see. Hello to Sam B. Notice how it takes the military assets of 30 countries just to slow up Russia. It's a good point. What are we talking about here? Yes, Emmett Till's father. Hello to Blacklisted. Oh, we're talking about the KLF, are we? The Justified Ancients of Moo. Yes, we are talking about the KLF. I spoke about them, a year or two ago? How they announced that they were leaving the music industry at an awards ceremony, and how they deleted all their records and cleaned out all the royalties, £1 million, toured Britain with it, and then on a Scottish island, they had nailed it to a board, and then they burned it. It's kind of an art statement. It's one of the strangest stories I've ever heard. And the video for Barbie Girl is also almost wholesome at this point, says David the Gnome. I remember that song. I thought it was catchy. We have good and bad news on the Corona doom today. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. French President Emmanuel Macron suffered a humiliating setback in Parliament after his vaccine passport scheme was defeated. And there's a picture of him from Getty Images. In all of these pictures, except the really outrageous gay ones, where he's half naked, grasping black men half naked, he always looks like a supervillain. Macron's minority government wanted to extend the policy whereby anyone entering France has to show proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test. However, the right-wing populist national rally, the hard-left La France Insoumise, and the right-wing Républicains all united to vote against the policy. Macron's government lost the vote by a margin of 219 to 195. The bill's defeat was met with wild cheering and a standing ovation from opposition lawmakers, and footage that was circulated widely on social media. The bill was one of the first to be put to Parliament by the new minority government, highlighting how Macron will find it incredibly difficult to get new laws passed in the country. Elisabeth Borne, the French Prime Minister, condemned the vote. The situation is serious. By joining together to vote against the measures to protect the French against COVID, LFILR, and prevent any border control against the virus. After the disbelief on this vote, I will fight so that the spirit of responsibility wins in the Senate, she tweeted. As previously highlighted, the French Minister of Health admitted that vaccine passports are a disguised form of mandatory vaccines, despite President Macron claiming vaccine mandates will not be compulsory. On the first day the new program was in place, police in Paris were visibly patrolling bars and cafes, demanding customers show proof they've had the jab. It later emerged that many businesses were refusing to enforce the scheme. Oh, and did I get to look at a picture of the Prime Minister of New Zealand, the sad Muslim lady who is even sadder now, if that's possible? Her name is Jacinda Ardern. She will bring back hated COVID restrictions as New Zealand battles its biggest ever outbreak with 11,000 cases a day. Remember all those people cheering on New Zealand? Boy, New Zealand, they have a great message for us. New Zealand shows us the way. Why can't we be like New Zealand? New Zealand is set to tighten its COVID restrictions, will hand out more free masks and rapid antigen tests as the virus threatens to run out of control. COVID-19 response minister Ayesha Verrill is expected to announce the measures Thursday as the country battles an outbreak that is seeing more than 11,000 new cases a day. The move to hand out more rats is aimed at getting more people to test and isolate if they are found to have the disease. Well, as Alex Berenson likes to say, virus gonna virus. Presently, free rats, are only given to those who test positive for the disease, have been a close household contact, are newly arrived in the country, or a critical worker. New Zealand has a traffic light system to grade COVID warnings, and currently the country sits on orange. This means Kiwis must wear a mask in many indoor settings, but otherwise are free to live their day-to-day lives, while being encouraged to protect vulnerable communities. At this stage, the government has not indicated the country will move to the red setting, which is the most highest level of COVID restrictions. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern asked that people remain vigilant in wearing masks, getting booster shots, and isolating if they had the disease. She said the measures were straightforward. Isolate. If you have COVID, that markedly brings down the infection rates of others. Your household isolating with you is equally important. Mask use and vaccination, those are three things that will have some of the biggest impact on our numbers. And does this story say how many people, what percentage of the New Zealand population is vaccinated? Because that would be useful to put in this story. Don't you think? Because I think that there was a wholesale compliance, not 100%. What do we have here? I'm going to a Ministry of Health website for New Zealand. Let's see, over 4 million about a first dose, almost 4 million of a second dose. Boosters, almost 3 million. Total doses, 10.8 million. Vaccination rate, depending on how you count it, fully vaccinated, 95% of the population. That would seem to suggest that the jab is not efficacious, but that would be conspiracy theory to make that claim, so I'm not going to make it. However, this from Humble Analysis. New Zealand vaccinated their entire adult population by the end of February, yet somehow they have the highest COVID case rate on Earth, despite an indoor mask mandate now set to tighten restrictions once again. New Zealand also happens to have the highest COVID death rate on Earth, apparently. I guess turning a formerly free democracy into a totalitarian prison island didn't work out as planned. New Zealand also happens to have high and persistent excess mortality this year, and this data is lagged, so the current COVID spike isn't evident yet. Also, New Zealand is facing a labor shortage as workers flee overseas and the economy is crashing. I'm sure none of that has anything to do with the past 2 years of hysterical panic, right? Tourism is a significant part of New Zealand's economy and has largely disappeared, down more than 90%. New Zealand is now begging tourists to return, but who wants to visit a country which hasn't yet moved on from hysteria? In the end, the only way past COVID is through. Eventually, New Zealand will come to accept this fact, but probably not until they paid a terrible and needless toll. And someone called Chad Baptist responded, if the vaccine prevents hospitalization and death, and almost every adult is vaccinated, why would you impose restrictions for a disease that should, in theory, result in almost zero hospitalizations and death? Because it shows you're a good person, that you care about other people. New Zealand was going to, and Australia were going to show the world all about zero COVID and how this was actually achievable. And it blew up in their faces. And I'm sorry for the people who have been sickened and those who have died, but I can't resist thinking, ha, ha, bloody ha. Meanwhile, Canada continues to get stupider. This is from Darren Major at CBC News. The federal government says it will resume mandatory random COVID-19 testing of international travelers arriving at 4 major airports next week. Ottawa suspended random testing for fully vaccinated travelers last month after airport authorities urged the government to drop the program, saying that it was causing long delays at airports. Testing remained in place for those not considered fully vaccinated. Fully vaccinated travelers will once again be subject to mandatory testing, although the government is moving the testing out of airports to nearby off-site locations, such as pharmacies. Travelers can also book a virtual self-swab appointment. I don't know what that could possibly mean. Fully vaccinated travelers arriving in Toronto, Calgary, Vancouver, and Montreal could undergo random testing starting Tuesday, because apparently Pearson Airport is not fragged enough. Do you think they want us to stop traveling? I think they do. And I think they're doing everything they can to get us to stop traveling, because traveling is for the elite. It is not for the little people. And in even stupider news from Canada, Laura Osman from the Canadian Press, Canada's drug regulator approved Moderna's coronavirus vaccine for infants and preschoolers, making it the first vaccine approved for that age group in the country. Health Canada now says the Moderna vaccine can be given to young children between the ages of 6 months and 5 years old in doses 1/4 the size of that approved for adults. And how many people of that age get coronavirus? And how many of them are even become seriously ill, let alone die? Well, we know the types who die. They are people with some severely compromised immune systems, and even so, it's a relative handful. There are more children dying in bicycle accidents and the like than dying of the coronavirus. But you got to eliminate the control group. Everyone must be vaccinated, because then there's no control group. So does it work? How well does it work? Well, if everyone is vaccinated, then we won't be able to make comparisons. And that is the whole reason for this. Oh, yes, more stupidity and added smugness from Canada. This is from Tom Dakers at Bluebird Banter. And the Kansas City Royals are coming to Toronto. Some of them are coming. Jeff Passan tweets, 10 Kansas City Royals who are not vaccinated will miss the trip. Up until today, 25 total visiting players had not been allowed into Canada because they were unvaccinated. Kansas City by itself has 10, including 4 of its top 5 hitters and its 2 best starters. They'll be replaced by a rash of AAA and AA players who will be in Toronto. So essentially, they're forced to throw the game. Tom Dakers says, be ready for a bunch of whining and complaining coming from Kansas City. They all did their own research. Toronto Blue Jays fans are, to the best of my knowledge, the most woke in Major League Baseball. And reading Bluebird Banter is, I don't know. I've given it up from time to time because the smug wokeness just becomes overwhelming, unbearable. Oh, and coming to Los Angeles. This is from NBC Los Angeles. Return of mask mandate appears imminent in LA County. Here's what to expect. LA County is on track to enter the high coronavirus community level as soon as Thursday, in which case an indoor mask mandate would return 2 weeks later, the public health director said Tuesday. If the county continues at its current pace, masks could be mandated indoors again by July the 29th. Oh, so here's an update from July the 11th. New cases, 3710. New deaths, 9. Current hospitalizations, unavailable. That's what it says, not available. Yeah, that certainly sounds like a crisis to me. And I'm going to have to be a little careful reading this next one. Is the Substack of Emerald Robinson called The Right Way. Again, with that that metaphor, that pun, whatever you want to call it. I went to the nail salon this week, and there was a young woman working there who started weeping inconsolably in a corner. I asked the manager what was wrong. She just lost her mother, was the reply. She had died in her sleep suddenly, though she was perfectly healthy. This last weekend, I had attended the funeral of an old friend. He was perfectly healthy too, and then he got late stage pancreatic cancer, and he was gone a few months later. That was the exact same story for another friend. He was healthy as a horse until he wasn't, because he too had suddenly developed late stage pancreatic cancer. Not to mention a young and very fit mother I know who just got a checkup and was told that she too has suddenly developed aggressive cancer in her early 40s. The perfectly healthy are getting bad cancers much too frequently now. The perfectly healthy are dying suddenly. What all of them shared was being vaccinated. Steve Kirsch on Substack has conducted a survey done by a third party, and the results are so disturbing that nobody in the corporate media will touch it. 10 million Americans have heart injuries. 10 million Americans had to be hospitalized after taking the vaccines. 5 million Americans can't work after being vaccinated. At least 600,000 Americans died after getting vaccinated. More than 5 billion people have been injected with at least one dose of a coronavirus vaccine. So if we extrapolate a 6% heart injury / hospitalization rate from the survey, that would mean 300 million people have been affected. Do you know that they come up with an acronym, sudden adult death syndrome, or SADS? People are just, keeling over and dying. Robinson continues, if you've been paying attention on social media, or most of all on Substack, then you already know that this man-made disaster was happening on a vast scale, because you've seen far too many posts of soccer players suddenly collapsing on the field, or young people hooked up to machines at the hospital after getting their first clot shot, just like me. In fact, mortality rates for young people across Europe are rising dramatically, in yet another sign that the use of the experimental jabs should be halted immediately. Healthy people are dying now so frequently and suddenly from heart failure that the totally corrupt corporate media has invented SADS to account for these obvious deaths. Suddenly, toddlers are having seizures after getting vaccinated as well. As for vaccinated women who are pregnant, they are experiencing miscarriages and stillbirths at much higher rates than in the past. What has the American medical community done about this catastrophe? They have aided and abetted it the entire way. They have taken the big pharma blood money and the federal government's blood money and have stayed silent while they injected your friends and family with these jabs. You know it, and I know it. When injured people had the audacity to complain about their vaccine injuries, our doctors and nurses gaslighted them, or told them to stay silent, or told them they had no clue why they were having problems. It's the most shameful episode in the history of American medicine. You might think that the coronavirus has gone away, but the global vaccine nightmare has just begun. Do you know that it's already being blamed on climate change? Yeah, the temperature rising a degree or 2 Celsius accounts for healthy young people falling over and dying, because that makes perfect sense, right? I mean, doesn't it? I mean, it would have to. Otherwise, this would mean that they've been lying to us. They would never do that because they always have our best interests at heart. And we know this because they tell us that they do. You should always listen to what people say and not what they do. I mean, right? Steve Kirsch, the aforementioned Steve Kirsch, reports, I'm over a year into this journey of trying to expose the safe and effective narrative, and here are the key learnings. 1, people only trust their doctors for medical advice. 2, doctors trust the FDA, CDC, Fauci, and the summaries on papers published in the peer-reviewed literature. They have no time to look at studies directly. They trust the government and the abstracts. 3, the mainstream media only trusts Fauci, the CDC, FDA, medical journal articles that support the narrative, and doctors who support the narrative. 4, members of Congress trust Fauci, the FDA, CDC, doctors, and the mainstream media. 5, the CDC and FDA take their marching orders from the White House. Their job is to achieve the vaccination goal, not to protect the public. 6, Doctors who realize what is going on and try to speak out risk losing their license to practice medicine, their hospital privileges, and their jobs. 7, if you work at the CDC or FDA and speak out, you'll be fired. And 8, hospital CEOs will not speak out because they will be fired or their hospital will be punished by the community, local press, and by the US government. See the problem? It's a catch-22. People only trust doctors, and honest doctors can't speak out without losing their license. To persuade people, you only have to get 3 things right. What is the message? Who is the messenger? Who are you trying to convince? Clearly, doctors are the key. Over and over, we hear people say, thanks for sharing all that information, but I will do what my doctor says. We also have confirmation from the medical institutions who are going to extraordinary lengths to keep doctors from talking. Why would they do that? Easy. They know doctors speaking out is the biggest risk for them. The ship has to be airtight, or it sinks. And let's see if there's anything new at Eugippius. And here we go. No, nothing new there, but I know that there is something new at Alec Berenson's Substack. And of course, he is now back on Twitter after a lengthy fight against his banishment. The sublime cynicism of the press for the Omicron-specific COVID vaccine. Since May, public health authorities and media outlets have started pushing a new generation of mRNA COVID booster shots, theoretically reformulated specifically against the Omicron variant. The new jabs supposedly fix the minor fact that the original mRNA jabs have proven all but useless against Omicron, which at least for now is the only variant of SARS-CoV-2 left outside labs. As has happened so many times in the last 2 years, the reporting around the Omicron boosters has been weirdly monochromatic. Practically every major news outlet parrots the talking points that Pfizer and Moderna offered when they reported results from their Omicron booster clinical trials. The boosters produce a stronger immune response and more Omicron-specific antibodies than the original shot. Pfizer and Moderna aren't lying, not exactly. What they're saying about the Omicron boosters is technically true. It is also meaningless, as the companies, the public health bureaucrats, and everyone else playing this shell game well know, except maybe the reporters. Never overestimate their understanding. Why? The mRNA shots work by causing cells to produce the coronavirus spike protein, the part of the virus that attaches to receptors on the surface of our cells. Our immune systems then recognize the spike and make antibodies against it. These antibodies will defeat the actual SARS-CoV-2 virus when people are exposed to it, preventing vaccinated people from being infected. Unfortunately, the Omicron variant of SARS-CoV-2 has mutated so that its spike protein has a significantly different structure than the original variant of the virus. Thus, the antibodies the first-generation mRNA vaccine causes us to make don't block it very well, and the shot provides little, if any, protection against Omicron infection. Why the virus has mutated in this way is one of the many questions that the vaccine fanatics would prefer no one ask, so put it aside for now. Pfizer and Moderna claim that they have the answer to this problem, new jabs containing mRNA that will cause cells to make the Omicron spike protein rather than the original protein. Then, theoretically, our immune systems will respond by making antibodies that will attach more strongly to the Omicron spike, providing new and stronger protection against Omicron. Sure enough, when Pfizer and Moderna ran clinical trials comparing their Omicron mRNA boosters to boosters using the original mRNA, they found that the Omicron mRNA boosters produced higher levels of Omicron antibodies. Yay! Success! Only not really. Why? Remember, the mRNA shots are particularly ill-suited to Omicron. Numerous studies have shown that infection protection provided by the original 2-dose regimen falls to 0, if not below, within months. For example, this paper in the New England Journal of Medicine reported that the Pfizer shots offered 9% protection against Omicron after 6 months, a little below the 95% protection Pfizer reported in its pivotal clinical trial. A booster briefly raises protection, but within a couple of months, it is again plunging toward 0. For Omicron-specific boosters to make a real difference, they would have to rewrite our immune response entirely. Unfortunately, the original mRNA shots appear to dominate the immune response even after people receive an Omicron-specific booster. Even after receiving this booster, people make far fewer Omicron antibodies than they made to the wild type spike when they received the original 2 doses of the vaccine. It is unclear what the companies or anyone else can do about this problem, which is called immune imprinting or original antigenic sin, and appears particularly acute with the mRNA vaccines. Second, while the mRNA shots initially cause the body to make very high levels of antibodies to the coronavirus, those antibodies wane fast. That's why the protection from infection that the original shot offered against the original SARS-CoV-2 cratered within a few months before Omicron even existed. Pfizer reported that an Omicron-specific shot with 30 micrograms of mRNA, the same amount in the original dose, caused recipients to make only 2.2 times as many antibodies capable of destroying Omicron as the original mRNA booster did. Given how quickly antibodies wane, that result probably translates into at most a month of extra protection compared to what the original boosters offer. In other words, the Omicron-specific boosters do nothing to fix the fundamental problems with the mRNA shots, to say nothing the risk that we are running with repeated dosing of this potent biotechnology on a schedule much faster than anyone predicted. And Berenson concludes, no, Omicron boosters are nothing more than a slightly repackaged and updated version of the same crummy product Pfizer and Moderna have sold for 18 months. Consumer product companies do this all the time. Pharmaceutical companies aren't supposed to, though, and if they tried, the Food and Drug Administration was supposed to stop them. At least it used to be. And there's a picture of Kit Kat duos, which now feature mint and dark chocolate. It's still a Kit Kat, he concludes. Let's go to the Daily Skeptic. It's like a horror movie, and I'm being forced to watch, and I can't close my eyes. Senior FDA and CDC officials speak out on political vaccine decisions. Well, I'm glad that some of them are speaking out. This is by Will Jones. Dr. Marty Makary, professor at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, and Dr. Tracy Beth Hogue, an epidemiologist affiliated with Florida Department of Health, have written a disturbing piece in Common Sense about how the U.S. medicine regulatory agencies, the FDA, CDC, and NIH, have been captured by a political narrative, leaving many of their senior doctors and scientists unhappy, frustrated, but silenced. Here's the opening. The calls and text messages are relentless. On the other end are doctors and scientists at the top levels of the NIH, FDA, and CDC. They're variously frustrated, exasperated, and alarmed about the direction of the agencies to which they have devoted their careers. It's like a horror movie I'm being forced to watch, and I can't close my eyes, one senior FDA official lamented. People are getting bad advice, and we can't say anything. I wonder how long they're going to be able to keep this up. It's obvious. It should be obvious to everyone that when it became clear that the jabs were heading or had reached little to no efficacy or even negative efficacy. Hey, look over there. It's the Ukraine. It's on fire. And we all love the Ukraine, and we must save the Ukraine. The whole coronavirus thing, it's completely under control. Nothing unusual going on there. Just stop paying attention. And this is from the Post-Millennial. The taxpayer-powered CBC released a video Wednesday featuring a gender-affirming voice teacher who teaches people how to shift their natural voices in order to fight off persistent gender dysphoria felt by her students. Renee Yaxon of Montreal is featured in the video and provides a vocal exercise designed to help people change their natural voice to a higher or lower pitch. Today, I'm going to prove to you that you already have everything you need to create a speaking voice that you love using one quick exercise. She says in the video through a voice drill that teaches how to masculinize or feminize your voice. If you're trying to masculinize your voice, I want you to say that big, relaxed "oh." Then memorize that shape and use it when you say key, Yaxon says. There was some negative reaction to this on social media, and trans people are not happy about this, to put it mildly. In fact, they are not going to stand for it. I don't know, I suggested, well, I actually responded, what do you recommend? Seizure of assets, forced labor, firing squads? Yes. Of course, this is at a time when the world's economy is falling apart or is being deliberately destroyed. Hey, look at this trans revolution. Isn't that glorious? People are discovering who they actually are, rejecting the genders they've been assigned at birth, and fighting prejudice and hatred every step of the way. It's really awe-inspiring, isn't it? Let's concentrate on that. Let's celebrate the sexual mutilation of children. Let's not think how we got to a point where the sexual mutilation of children is not only legal, it's applauded, and you must applaud it. And those who counsel, say, 10-year-old girls from embarking on a course that would wreck them physically, well, don't do that. Parents can't counsel against that anymore, because in my country, you are guilty of a crime and can be imprisoned for it. Let's go back to Joseph Tainter's The Collapse of Complex Societies. Collapse and the declining productivity of complexity. We arrive in this section at one of the major implications of the study. Most of the writers whose work has been considered seem to approve of civilizations and complex societies. They see complexity as a desirable, even commendable condition of human affairs. Civilization to them is the ultimate accomplishment of human society, far simpler, preferable to simpler, less differentiated forms of organization. An appreciation for the artistic, literary, and scientific accomplishments of civilizations clearly has much to do with this, as does the industrial world's view of itself as the culmination of human history. Toynbee is perhaps most extreme in this respect, but he is by no means atypical. Spengler, in his abhorrence of civilization in his sequelae, represents a minority view, as does Rappaport. With such emphasis on civil society as desirable, it is almost necessary that collapse be viewed as a catastrophe. An end to the artistic and literary features of civilization, well, we've pretty much seen that in our own society, have we not? In our own highly complex society? And to the umbrella of service and protection that an administration provides are seen as fearful events, truly paradise lost. The notion that collapse is a catastrophe is rampant, not only among the public, but also throughout the scholarly professions that study it. Archaeology is as clearly implicated in this as in any other field. As a profession, we have tended disproportionately to investigate urban and administrative centers, where the richest archaeological remains are commonly found. When with collapse, these centers are abandoned or reduced in scale, their loss is catastrophic for our database, our museum collections, even for our ability to secure financial backing. Dark ages are rarely as attractive to philanthropists or funding institutions. Archaeologists, though, are not solely at fault. Classicists and historians who rely on literary sources are also biased against dark ages, for in such times their databases largely disappear. A less biased approach must be not only to study elites and their creations, but also to acquire information on the producing segments of complex societies that continue, if in reduced numbers, after collapse. Archaeology, of course, has great potential to provide such information. Complex societies, it must be emphasized again, are recent in human history. Collapse, then, is not a fall to some primordial chaos, but a return to the normal human condition of lower complexity. The notion that collapse is uniformly a catastrophe is contradicted, moreover, by the present theory. To the extent that collapse is due to declining marginal returns on investment in complexity, it is an economizing process. It occurs when it becomes necessary to restore the marginal return on organizational investment to a more favorable level. To a population that is receiving little return on the cost of supporting complexity, the loss of that complexity brings economic and perhaps administrative gains. Again, one is reminded of the support sometimes given by the later Roman population to the invading barbarians, and of the success of the latter at deflecting further invasions of Western Europe. The attitudes of the late Maya and Chicoan populations toward their administrators cannot be known, but can easily be imagined. Societies collapse when stress requires some organizational change. In a situation where the marginal utility of still greater complexity would be too low, collapse is an economical alternative. Thus, the Chicoans did not rise to the challenge of the final drought because the cost of doing so would have been too high relative to the benefits, although the end of the Chicoan system meant the end of some benefits, as does the end of any complex system. It also brought an increase in the marginal return on organization. The Maya, similarly, appear to have reached the point where evolution toward larger polities would have brought little return for great effort. Since the status quo was so deleterious, collapse was the most logical adjustment. One of the explanatory themes reviewed in Chapter 3, the failure to adapt model, may now have its full weakness revealed. Proponents of this view argue in one form or another that complex societies end because they fail to respond to changed circumstances. This notion is clearly obviated. Under a situation of declining marginal returns, collapse may be the most appropriate response. Such societies have not failed to adapt. In the economic sense, they have adapted well, perhaps not as those who value civilizations would wish, but appropriately under the circumstances. What may be a catastrophe to administrators and later observers need not be to the bulk of the population. It may only be among those members of a society who have neither the opportunity nor the ability to produce primary food resources that the collapse of administrative hierarchies is a clear disaster. Among those less specialized, severing the ties that link local groups to a regional entity is often attractive. Collapse, then, is not intrinsically a catastrophe. It is a rational economizing process that may well benefit much of the population. One ambiguity in this view is the major loss of population that sometimes accompanies collapse. The Maya are a classic case in point. How advantageous can the Maya collapse have been if it resulted in major population loss? In fact, as the work of Sidres and Berger shows, the relationship between Maya collapse and population loss is unclear. It is not certain that these phenomena were coeval, especially since the collapse took decades to overcome all centers, nor even that the lowland population loss does not reflect emigration to peripheral areas. With these ambiguities unresolved, discussions of cause and effect are premature. In any event, nothing in the preceding paragraphs implies that human actions always achieve in the long term a desirable outcome. Even if the Maya collapse proved detrimental to the survival of large parts of the population in the long run, this need not mean that in the short term, collapse was not an economizing process. In fact, there are indications that leveling or actual decline of population may often precede collapse, even by several centuries. Such patterns have been discussed for both the Roman and Mayan cases. Recent research indicates a similar trend at the great Mississippian center of Cahokia. Population in the region apparently had peaked by circa 1150 AD and declined until the final collapse 250 years later. I'll have more from Joseph Tainer's The Collapse of Complex Societies tomorrow. And we're in the home stretch, folks. We're in the home stretch. I am a woman, hear me mule. Sometimes it seems as if the whole of the media has been subsumed by this. And I could talk about this every day, but I'm going to talk about it today and maybe not talk about it for a few days afterwards. This is by Lizzie Mail from the Daily Mail. Actress claims she was kicked off misogynistic Southwest Airlines flight after she tried to defend a woman being slut-shamed by a attendant who said her tank top was too revealing for a family company. Melina Bobadilla, an actress best known for her recurring role on Netflix's Gentified, shared her story on a now viral Twitter thread where she said the airline allegedly disrespected two women of color, endangered one by needlessly calling the cops to protect a conservative white man, unquote. Conservative white men. Don't you just hate them? Boo! The Mexican-American actress had boarded the Southwest flight at Sacramento where the incident involved Los Angeles-based singer Maybe JC was asked to cover up. Bobadillo said, "Hey friends, just got pulled off a Southwest Air flight because I advocated for a young woman being shamed and harassed by an employee for wearing a tank top that was deemed too revealing." She explained that the employee became defensive when asking about what the rules JC was breaking, responding, "She is wearing a corset and this is a family company. Some people find it offensive." Actress Melina then told the attendant she felt threatened and offended by the man directly behind her who wore a "Let's Go Brandon" t-shirt, but says the employee did not care. And here's a picture of Melina Bobadilla, who is 30 years old and already looks like a garden gnome. Basically, Southwest Air slut shamed a young woman of color for wearing a tank top. It's not a tank top. It is, I've seen the pictures, and it is clearly a corset. They deemed offensive, forcing her to wear a company-issued sweater, removed me for questioning their misogynistic policy, exercised a double standard when enforcing an alleged offensive attire rule. She continued in her viral Twitter thread. The raggedy folks, raggedy? Are you allowed to use that word? The raggedy folks at Southwest Air in Sacramento disrespected two women of color, endangered one by needlessly calling the cops, and went out of the way to protect a conservative white man. Yup, that tracks. Southwest Air is steamy, stale trash. Go out of business already. And here's a picture of Maybe JC. Unsurprisingly, in this smartphone photo, this unposed photo, she is nowhere near as busty or attractive as she is in the picture she took on herself, Instagram photo, which was obviously worked on. So here we have one woman making a fuss about another woman who gets to make a fuss because she goes out in public and she's not really dressed. You're supposed to wear something above that lingerie because that is what it is that she is wearing. Maybe JC, that's her name. Maybe, Maybe JC, Jacy, posted a video of her own on TikTok, which got over 300,000 views, where she showed her top, which got Ms. Bobadilla thrown off the flight. In one post, she captioned her video, quote, "Give me my money back, smelly hose, Southwest Airlines, or send me a bottle of expensive champagne. Bro, I got dress coded on a Southwest flight. Are we in high school? Are you upset about my shoulders? It's 102 degrees. I'm sure it's not 102 degrees inside the aircraft. And it caused a scene because some sweet lady stuck up for me and then kicked off the flight. Whoever grandma complained about me, catch me outside, bitch." Such charming, charming people. And here are two more examples of this. Going on to Instagram, say, or TikTok to show, how virtuous you are or how unvirtuous everyone but you is. And we see more and more and more of this. Here we go. The first one is from someone called Hegemommy or Jessica Mason Piclo. Honestly, if you're a white person who says they're committed to racial justice and you're in good standing with most of your family, I have questions for you, and they are definitely pointed. Full disclosure, I'm in contact with exactly 3 members of my birth and extended family for this specific reason. That first question is, how committed are you really? Even the good white families are a skosh racist when you scratch the surface. She's one of those good whites. I generally don't like to point this out, except when it's relevant, and I think it's relevant in this case. She is an exceedingly ugly woman, described as executive editor, senior vice president, Rewire News Group, co-host of Boom, lawyered podcast, Scottish nerd, pronouns she, her. Yes, you're not a good white person unless you shut out all the members of your family who don't agree with you about everything. And there are a lot of women like that. It's not just politics, also the corona doom. What do you mean you don't think we should wear masks forever? What do you mean that we shouldn't get jabbed 10 times, every 9 months, every 6 months, every 3 months, if necessary? Why can't we give the jab to babies in the womb? I mean, you got to start early. You can't start too early. And, there was some response from some white knighter called Mike Nollett. You've just hit on why social change is so hard. People are terrified of being shunned. Much easier just to maintain what is often an immoral status quo. I see you're from Nebraska too, says Jessica Mason Piclo. Mike Nollett responds, yep, a fun place to live in the age of Trump. Jessica Mason Piclo, who has a long memory, sending solidarity. My experience living there during the Reagan and Bush years sucked in truly formative ways. Mike Nollett, ooh, well, thank you. In my youth, I identified as a conservative. Breaking that link has certainly made some of my family unhappy with me. A response from someone called Pine Cellar. I think my white mom's family is fairly cool, as they not only openly embraced my Japanese dad when they married in the 1970s, but have also been my dad's biggest allies as she's come out as a trans woman. Maybe they're the outliers. As I like to say, because it's true, alienation induces a powerful alienation in those people who leave their countries to go to foreign ones. We see this expressed in many different ways. And here's a picture, I guess this is from Instagram, of a woman who's got her face right up to the camera. And she's wearing a black t-shirt, which says on it, she's someone's sister/mother, daughter/wife. And she has crossed out, or the t-shirt is crossed out with red, the apostrophe S, the sister, mother, and daughter, wife. She's someone. Get it? She's special. So this woman has problem glasses, of course. She's wearing braids like a little girl. And I remember Ben Stein writing decades ago that whenever you run into an adult woman wearing braids, what that means is she is going to act like a child. So she's got the braids, she's got the problem glasses, this disgusting smirk on her face, and on camera right, we have the obligatory morbidly obese cat. But she is someone. Yeah, she's someone, all right. And do we have any other examples of this? Oh, yes, we do. Indeed, we do. From someone called Anika Molesworth. And this breaks my two-name rule. My two-name rule is that if you have a surname which is odd, you have to make sure that your first or Christian name is not odd. So Molesworth is the kind of name that I suspect you would get bullied for, right? So why not be called, I don't know, Jill or Mary or Jane or something like that? Instead, she's called Anika. At least it's not spelt with two E's. At least not with two E's. So, Anika tweeted, oh dear, she banned me? But I haven't written anything about her. I haven't said anything about her until just now. Golly, I must be on a list. And Anika Molesworth is an Australian woman who describes herself, oh, it's pronounced Anika. Well, thank you. She's an Australian woman, and she's a farmer. That's what she says. She has a piece on her website Strong trigger warning. The following article relates to bullying, hate speech, offensive language, and suicide. And okay, does she include the original tweet, or am I banned from seeing that because she's blocked me? Basically, she said that she is causing global warming and that she was going to do everything that she could to, to stop her causing global warming. She got a lot of unpleasant responses. Let me jump to the crux of the article. It's never okay to bully someone or tell them to take their life. This week, I experienced a bombardment of online hate messages, bullying, harassment, trolling, cyber stalking, whatever one labels it. It is never okay. I tweeted on Monday and then went offline to do farm chores. We have some students out here this week getting amongst nature, as well as constructing a wildlife rehabilitation enclosure. So that we're tasked to do away from the screen. It wasn't until later that when I received 2 messages in my inbox that I realized something was going on. One email read, "Be assured you are not alone," and the other one read, "F you and your cult." I went back to my online post. Attached to it were hundreds and hundreds of comments, and unfortunately, a lot of them could only be described as vile hate speech. Oh, I am causing climate change. That was the original one. Yes, she personally causing climate change. And with my fear, grief, responsibility, determination, hope, and vision, I will do all I can to help fix this problem, and a whole bunch of hashtags with climate in it. It's unfortunate that this woman has got tweets from people wishing that she would die soon. I have been subjected to the same thing. It was unpleasant, but then, of course, I could have obviated that by not, producing, as the kids like to say, spicy takes on things. And it's just something that women on social media just seem to have so much difficulty understanding. If you're going to advocate policies which are going to lead to, I don't know, the destruction of the world as we know it in a Malthusian die-off, well, you should expect some negative attention, right? But now we have, and here's an example of woman-on-woman bullying, which of course is far more prevalent, as studies have shown, than man-on-woman bullying. And there's celebrities involved, so it's even better. This is from Laura Parkin for the Daily Mail. Doja Cat has come under fire after she shared a video of herself mimicking Amber Heard's viral testimony where she said, "My dog stepped on a bee." In the now deleted TikTok video, the rapper, 26, poked fun at the actress, 36, as she quoted a line from the defamation trial filed by her ex-husband, Johnny Depp, in which he told the court of alleged domestic abuse. Taking to Twitter Wednesday, viewers of the clip slammed Doja for the cruel and redundant soundbite, whilst others added that thousands of people did the same last month. And here is a picture of Doja Cat, and she's messing with her hair again. Have we learned nothing from Jada Pinkett Smith? Do these women want to go bald? Stop messing with your hair with those ultra tight braids. Pull back. It's not good. So I watched someone saved her 36-second comedy bit, and it's pretty good, I have to say, because she says, my dog stepped on a bee and stepped on a bee. She repeats this, and it's funny because I'd never heard that before, of a dog stepping on a bee. And I gather this is part of the indictment against Johnny Depp, that Amber Heard's life was such misery, so miserable that her dog stepped on a bee. But so you've got all these people running to the defense of Amber Heard against Doja Cat. And yes, intersectionality. Don't you just love it? More, please. IDC, which side you're on, but Doja Cat making fun of Amber Heard is actually disgusting. And if you don't see that, you're a horrible person, IDC. People talking about Doja Cat mocking Amber Heard, but wasn't y'all dragging her not too long ago? Internet is weird. Not a huge fan of Doja Cat, but why are people suddenly outraged when she mimicked Amber Heard's "I stepped on a bee"? Thought it was the dog. And thousands of people were doing the same thing a few months ago. So there is my roundup of muling women. Look at me, look at me, look at me. Everyone is being so mean to me. I would have thought it'd be a fairly safe bet to go after Amber Heard because she did not come out of this trial well, not well at all. In fact, it seemed to be a rather rare reversal. I would not have bet on Johnny Depp winning such a public relations victory, considering that he looks deranged and has looked deranged for many years. And, the kind of stunts that he engages in do not really endear one to him. However, in these cases, it comes down to who's worse. And Amber Heard is worse. Very, very much worse. Speaking of dogs, defecating on someone's bed, your partner's bed, and then blaming it on a teacup dog, that was not a good decision. Let's have a final look at the chat. Okay. What do we got here? Jason Bryan, who isn't deranged in 2022? Good question. Anwin says Heard could have won that case with good lawyers, or maybe, did you see the expert witnesses that were called on her behalf? One psychologist or psychiatrist who appeared to be going through some sort of mental collapse as he was testifying. Jason Bryan says, KMG, are you a light, medium, or dark roast drinker? I don't drink coffee. I never have. Laird Gordon McDoodle said, I got blocked by her. I didn't send her nasty tweets. I criticized her severely in tweets that probably ended up in her feed. British American, Randy, is this you or the liquor talking, Mr. Leahy? Leahy, I am the liquor. Jason Bryan says, I'm banned everywhere. The face Heard made right after she said that was hilarious, says Anwin. She made a lot of hilarious faces. And didn't you have enough money, to pay for coaches? Because she's going to be spending all that time, and presumably she was coached. You don't want to make a mockery of yourself, particularly when when the trial is being televised. Okay, sure, you're recounting something terrible that was done to you, or that you claim that was done to you, and you tear up, or maybe you lose your composure, not over and over again. People think that you're a phony. Dividend says women really know how to bully women. Well, obligatory Seinfeld reference. You remember the one about Henry Miller, the episode about Henry Miller, Tropic of Cancer or Tropic of Capricorn, the book that was not returned to the library, and we met, Mr. Bookman, the library detective. And so the wedgie, the process of the wedgie is explained, and the atomic wedgie, and one of them, Jerry must say, or Elaine says, this is terrible. These things that men do to each other. And Jerry says, oh, well, what do women do? And Elaine says, we just bully them until they get eating disorders. A lot of truth in that. Do we have anyone new here? Yo Mama says, type S to spit on the French Revolution. A former colleague and I bonded over being into Trump in Canada, says Ogan's Iron. He disappointed me a lot on COVID. Turns out he just listens to whatever his pastor allowed him to like. Okay. My baby mama being so based and anti-vax kept me going for the last 3 years, says Jason Bryan. Emmett Kelly's Earth. Good news. We're returning to a more favorable level. Matt Beck says, I contracted the OG COVID variant way back in December 2020. I never got reinfected by another variant. Given that I live in Victoria, which is close to China, well, it's on the West Coast, as far west as you can get, almost. There's a lot of traffic with China, a lot of traffic with Wuhan. And back in, I think it was December 2019, I got sick. I got seriously ill. And I thought it was, the flu. Now, since I started taking zinc, more than 25 years ago, I stopped getting colds and flus. This is not medical advice, mind. And so, I don't know, I was rather surprised. And, the fever and the chills and the dry, violent, hacking cough. I couldn't sleep. I would wake up continually in the night and have a coughing fit such that I seriously worried that I was going to break a rib or start vomiting blood. And the worst part of it was, 4 or 5 days, and there was about 2 days on either end where it was not quite as bad. Also, my head swirling the whole time. So I'm almost certain that I got coronavirus in 2019. Of course, it was obvious, that places like British Columbia and Washington and Oregon and California were going to get it before anyone else, because of all the traffic, well, specifically Chinese people flying from America and Canada to China and then back again. Finally, Jason Bryant says, I smoke a ton of weed and got a COVID tested positive and didn't cough at all. Worst symptom was my feet. Okay. Ogan's Iron says, got it a few months ago. Hollywood is so boring. Who cares, says Don Willis. I don't know. It's always funny to me when these Hollywood people get into feuds with one another. Richly amusing, in fact. What am I drinking? I'm drinking tea. Straight tea. British American says, I can't look at her the same way since the turd revolution. Amber Turd, she shall be forever more. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. I shall be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you'd like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace at hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations may be made to the live stream directly via Interact at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection to ease the burden. Good night.